For him? Oh, yeah, he was. He said that. So speak up. I agree. Go ahead, Brian. We started. Good morning. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook Live and YouTube. Thanks for coming today, guys. Oddly enough, my kids have a snow day today, which I can't believe. But I guess in Warren County, you got some areas that have higher elevation. Cool little quote to start January off. The beginning is always today. The beginning is always today. Mary Wollstonecraft, whatever I say her name, but I thought it was pretty cool. But a little fun fact, I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not. We talked a lot about electricity and data centers and artificial intelligence in last month's meeting. Well, as AI data centers are multiplying across the country, they are sucking up huge amounts of power. And this is also distorting the normal flow of electricity. And so this threatens home appliances and aging power equipment, because what happens is when your power doesn't come in consistently, it can cause fires and it can cause issues. Now, the two areas especially being affected right now is the city of Chicago and Northern Virginia, with massive data centers expanding. But 3/4 of the highly distorted power readings across the country are within 50 miles of data center activity. So they can actually point to, a lot of people talked about electric cars and how when we went to electric cars, that was really going to mess the power grid up. Well, the one that's not getting a lot of conversation are these AI data power centers. Because, you think about what is artificial intelligence. Well, they're basically mimicking the human brain with a bunch of microchips. And that requires a bunch of power. And so the term that they're using for this is called bad harmonics. And so basically, if you think of it this way, it's like the static you hear before you turn up when you used to turn up a radio or headphones, you would hear the static as it's going up. That's what they call, the bad harmonics. And so what it can do is it can cause electronics to run hot, or it can cause the motors to rattle. And so and this really has never this has not affected the United States in a long time. This has mainly been a third world thing. Like, if you look at Cuba, where they don't have consistent power, and other countries like that, and, several countries in Africa and in Asia don't have power. But what you're seeing is, sudden surges or sags in the electrical grid can cause fires. And so Whisker Labs, which I never even really heard of them very much, they track power quality pretty much across the United States. So they have roughly 1 million residential sensors across the country. You probably don't realize that, but 90% of U.S. homes are within half a mile of one of their sensors. So they've got a really good idea on how the power grid is operating. And so more than half of the households showing the worst bad harmonics distortions in the power grid are within 20 miles of data centers. 3.7 million people live in the most impacted areas where basically their power is going in and out. And so when we look at one of the big things affecting your lives and investments is, this term electricity, which has been kind of thought of as a afterthought, the fact that you can have a hot shower or you can have these things. As more and more of these data centers get built and more electric cars and hybrid cars go on the market, and we're not building any more power plants really, what could go wrong? And so, and then the big thing for us as investors have these things been called the modular nuclear reactors. I mean, what was the biggest problem last week with solar energy? There's no sun, right? I was at my farm on Friday, and there's a really pretty mountain called Cardinal Mountain, which is, I'm a Cardinals fan, so it's even more enjoyable for me, in McMinnville. And what could we not see? We couldn't see Cardinal Mountain. Well, if I powered my house with solar power, the thermostat wouldn't be very warm, right? And so TVA, of course, announced, I think it was last year, the year before, that they were going to partner with Hitachi, General Electric, and another company on building these small modular nuclear reactors. And so we're seeing a renaissance in power because everybody knows that wind and solar can't do it. They're not consistent enough. If if you're in California, Southern California, and there's not a fire going, unfortunately, which we're talking about in a second, it works out pretty well. But when those smoke starts coming through, there's definitely going to be a lack of usage. If you're in, and so nuclear power, the nice thing about nuclear power is it runs whether it's cold, whether it's hot, whatever it is. The problem is the nuclear waste, right? And so there's been a lot of money is getting put into this industry, to this area as investors. A lot of people are throwing in money in these modular nuclear reactors because the idea is instead of having to hook up to the grid, you could bring the grid to you. So if Chicago and Northern Virginia have a bunch of power issues, just build a power plant where they are. Because right now you got to build transmission lines from the power plant to get to you. Where if you have a power plant right there, what can you do? You got the power right there, you plug it in, like you said, Phil. Of course, the big fear with nuclear power is the waste. And so there was a company I was reading about, I think it was either yesterday or Friday, and they're actually burying their modular nuclear reactors thousands of feet under the earth. Because if you do that, and there's a blow up, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't cause any deaths because it's so far under, there's actual natural pressure that keeps it to where it's safe. And they think it's going to be cheaper for them to build these deep underground than to try to build them above ground because of the environmental risk. Anyway, I mean, unless you're drinking water, because water does come from the earth, but whatever. And so this continues to be an issue, but it's very, very likely in the next, if you look at the economy, and where we're seeing a lot of growth is in these data centers and in microchips. And you're seeing a huge, trillions of dollars getting invested in this. This is going to take power. And we're not building the power. So, maybe we should be investing in generator stocks, right? Because you can already see kind of what's going to occur is when people don't have power, they're going to start switching to diesel again. Or propane or whatever they have on their end. But this continues to be a big, big issue. And if you ever notice, like with your power at your house, that you start seeing changes, or if they announce, hey, this big mega site over here in Manchester, they're going to put a bunch of data centers there. Recognize what that's going to do to the power grid, right? You're going to see, a loss of power. And so utility stocks are quickly going from these conservative, income-producing companies to being very, very big opportunities to grow in the economy. Right now, where do we get most of our power from in America right now? No? I wish. No? No? Natural gas. Because natural gas, if you go to Texas, where they frack for oil, natural gas is it's a byproduct. It's basically free because natural gas and oil are together. And the big issue you have across our country is if you go to Texas, natural gas actually trades in the summer at negative rates, which means they'll pay you to take it away. But if you go to the Northeast right now, it's probably trading at a pretty high multiple relative to that. I don't know. I didn't look at the price. So I don't want to guess. But with the cold winter, it did have a big increase. The cold storm coming, there was a big increase about 2 weeks ago. And so the issue you have is that natural gas, they don't have pipelines to get that natural gas up to the Northeast and to California. And because they don't have pipelines, they ship it by boat and rail. But like in Boston, they actually they have a terminal in Texas that basically takes the natural gas, freezes it, ships it on the boat on the ocean. It goes right into Boston Harbor, and then they turn it into natural gas. It'd be a lot cheaper if they set a pipeline that went straight there. And that's going to be probably the number one issue as you look at the new government going into office next week, a week from yesterday, is they have said they're going to bring down energy prices. Well, the only way to really do that is going to be to build pipelines. Because here's the thing, right? If you're in Texas and natural gas trades at a negative price, are you going to drill for natural gas? It's got to make money, right? Or you're not going to do it. So if there's a pipeline that goes to Boston, then you can do it. But what's the big issue with building pipelines? The environmental reasons, right? Well, I don't want that pipeline going through my house. I don't want that going through my farm. And then all the lawsuits. And so it's going to be really interesting to see, because when we look at regulations, and obviously when we look at our investments right now, there's a lot of unknowns, which is causing us to lose money. Is the number one thing is, how do you force people in New York and California to take these pipelines? Because generally speaking, they don't want them. But they're paying a lot more for fuel in California. I don't know if you noticed, ConocoPhillips announced, because of a California law next year, they're shutting down all their refineries in Los Angeles. So what's that going to do to gas prices there? It's going to go up. And so what you're seeing is our country is just so divided. And this really affects our economic conditions, because if people in California pay more for natural gas, that still affects inflation for everybody that lives in America. Because when they do the numbers, they don't just include Tennessee, they include what? The entire country. And so if the current president administration is coming in power, if they're going to be successful, they're going to have to convince the EPA, all the lawsuits, and the government to build all these pipelines in a relatively quick manner to fix the problem. That's not so easy, right? But we'll see what happens. That's one of the biggest things here. But these modular nuclear reactors, the idea is you basically build a nuclear reactor in a factory, and you don't have to go through all the environmental rules, because it's basically pre-built, and then you just drop it off where you want to use it. And so the idea is you just plug it in. Because right now, I was driving out to Lebanon, and I made a stupid mistake, and I ended up going to Hartsville, Tennessee. Well, if you ever drive to Hartsville, there's a big nuclear reactor there that's not finished. Everything's built, but it's not done. There's a bunch of cows hanging out by it, right? I actually drove right next to it. I'm like, I think I went the wrong way. And that's the big issue is the regulations are so hard. And the modular reactors, the idea is, because they're built in a factory, once they're approved in that factory, they can just plug them in. But we're going to have to do something about power, because with all these data centers, with the electric cars and the hybrid cars in the market, we're going to need more electricity. Some people think we need 60% more power in the next 10 years than we're using right now. That's a lot of things to be built. It's pretty exciting, though, for investors, because that's a lot of growth in the economy. That's a lot of new things coming. It's a lot of empty buildings that would be valuable for something else. A lot of land to be used. Yes?
Why does AI take up so much?
Okay, so like when you look at artificial intelligence, which I'm not an expert on, but the idea of NVIDIA's chip, right? So I don't know if you guys have ever played a computer game before, but my little brother loves all these, really in-depth action figure games. So the idea is, what NVIDIA's chip originally did, because he was buying NVIDIA chips when I was a kid, was it would create an image or a picture of like let's say you want to be a steroid monkey or something, Darla, and the steroid monkey is going to go attack some steroid rabbit. I don't know. And so you're a rabbit man. And so it projects a picture of a rabbit man. And the thing that what the NVIDIA chips do is they take, I don't know if it's thousands or millions of chips, and they're all placed together, and they will grab that picture. So when you're doing a search on ChatGPT, it's going to run through all the pictures on the internet, and it's going to create an image based on what pictures are in its database. Now, there's a whole lot of issues here, right? Because you couldn't have artificial intelligence running through our systems, because that's all your social security numbers, that's all your phone numbers, it's all your financial information. So you got to be careful, because if that all is on the internet, then it's all what? You can find it. So certain applications can be put on artificial intelligence, and certain applications got to be kind of limited. And then what's open source, where it's on the open web, and what's closed in, right? And so, but the idea is you've got all these microchips. Just imagine, like, on this piece of paper, let's say you had, and I'm just totally guessing, Darla, because I didn't do any numbers. Let's say you had 1,000 microchips on this piece of paper, because they're really, really small, right? They're 2 nanometers, which is smaller than a human eye, and they're all placed together, and that basically forms kind of like your brain when you get all your brain cells, and your brain cells have your cerebral cortex, and then the power. When I'm talking right now, it's telling my mouth to what? Speak. And so all that takes a lot of power, because you basically are having like the human brain times a multiple of the human brain on this piece of paper. And to regenerate that, you need a lot of electricity. That's why if you ever go back to like some of the sci-fi movies, what are they always trying to blow up? The power grid. Because if you want to stop artificial intelligence, what do? You can cut the power out, because if there's no power, it doesn't work. So like in the Matrix, what do? They're using the human brains for power. Like they take these babies, they're growing them up, and they're using their brains, and they are power. And it's kind of true with what they're doing is it's all the power grid. And so when we look at, now, Northern Virginia is where all these data centers are really booming. By the way, what's located in Northern Virginia? U.S. government. Huh. So who do you think is using, if most of the power in our country is getting stored in Northern Virginia, and they're building a bunch of data centers for artificial intelligence in Northern Virginia, who's using most of the artificial intelligence stuff? Probably U.S. military, if we're going to get more specific, right? Because it's probably not the driver's license offices or the Social Security Administration. It's probably who? It's the military. So I won't go there on that one, but you can think about it. Think about what they could be doing. But that's basically, it just takes a lot of power. And so when we start looking as investors, if you look at the last few days, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, like look at NVIDIA, they're obviously the kingpin of the chips and the smallest nanometer chips, and everybody and their brother is trying to catch them and copy them and build better chips. So every major company that's a technology company has their own way of going about it. And so this growth into this area is massive because of the application. And so we'll see how it all changes the world. But it's going to be changing the world. It already has changed the world. It's just going to continue. One of the reasons why they think Tesla, a lot of people like Tesla, is Tesla's got those little bionic men. They can lift stuff up. They weigh like 150 pounds, I think, and they're like 5'10". And so the idea is that all those men will be making the chips, and you'll actually have robot servants taking care of you until they, take care of you. And so, but anyway, that's the only option there. But anyway, we'll see where that goes. I don't want to go too much down that rabbit hole. No reason to live in fear. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the other, before I get into some other things, or the Los Angeles fires and insurance. Whew. So obviously it's terrible. I used to live in Los Angeles in Malibu. So the Pacific Palisades, actually I went there with a couple of friends of mine back in 2019 in February, and the house we actually stayed in looked like it burned down from the fire map that we stayed in. So this area is a very, very affluent area. And we can go into I don't want to go into political causes. Really just want to talk about how it's going to affect us as investors. Well, if you're familiar with something called reinsurance, the idea is all these insurance companies, everybody that you have a policy with, they sell part of your policy to a company in California, and a company in California sells part of their policy to you. And so if you look at what's been the major thing that's happened in Tennessee that's caused our insurance rates to go up? Yeah. Which one? East Tennessee hurricane. What's coming, this year? And then hail, roofs. Everybody's pretty much had to get their roof replaced, and the insurance companies are covering it. And that sounds great until your insurance company goes bankrupt. right? Like we talked about State Farm last year being downgraded to one level below junk status. Junk means they can't pay their bills. State Farm is the largest insurance company in the United States. That's a bad thing. That's going to affect you. And these fires are going to affect you too. Because all these homes that are burning down, they're not $10,000 homes. I remember we rented one for my 10-year college reunion. I rented a house in Malibu, and it was for sale. And it was about 2,100 square feet, and it was selling for like $5 million was the ask price. This is before COVID prices inflated. Okay? The other thing that area has is a real problem is it takes about 2 to 5 years to get a building permit. Think about that, right? You just lost your $10 million house. And in normal times, when they're not busy, it takes 2 to 5 years to get a building permit. Of course, I went to Pepperdine, and Pepperdine had some land down in, it's called the Colony, which is the main part of Malibu. And they owned the land for 20 years, but they sued them for 20 years to not develop anything there. So they gave the land to Malibu because they got tired of the lawsuit. And even though they weren't forced to give it to them, they spent so much money fighting the city of Malibu to develop land they owned, they finally just what? Gave it away. I mean, to show you how this area is so different than where we live, when I was going to college there, they didn't have a sewer. Because they didn't want the place to expand, so everybody was on septic tanks. So they dumped raw sewage in the ocean. And so you ever see the beautiful, I was listening to the Beach Boys this morning on the way here, the beautiful Surfrider Beach? Guess where the pipe is for the sewer? Surfrider Beach. They had actually a few people die from injecting, or not injecting, the stuff, the bacteria got in their lungs and killed them on that beach. They finally put a sewer in. Okay? This is 2006, 2002. This is not like 20, 30, 40, I mean, it's 20 years ago. It's not 50 years ago. This is recent history. They didn't have a sewer, okay? And so this is going to have a huge impact on your ability to get a homeowner's insurance policy. I would say the days of a real homeowner's insurance policy, they just ended with these fires. I see a future where your deductible is $15,000 or $20,000 to get insurance. Maybe $40,000. You know, 20% of Florida homeowners before the hurricanes weren't carrying insurance. 20% of the population of the state of Florida did not have homeowners insurance. Okay, now, what's interesting about this, of course, is when we start looking at the economy, this is actually going to be typically very good for that local economy. Why?
Because they got to build it all back.
Right. So if you look at, one of the biggest mistakes that the current guy that's president and the guy that's going to be president made, they made two huge mistakes when it came to money. They treated the COVID disaster like the 2008 financial crisis. And there's a big difference when we look at this as investors. So in 2008, you have a financial crisis. If you look at the Spanish flu or COVID, you have a pandemic or whatever you want to call it. And so what happened after the Spanish flu? Spanish flu was after World War I. It's in 1920, 1919, 1920, 1921. It's about 3 years. It might be 18. I got my dates wrong. But what happened after the Spanish flu ended? The Roaring Twenties. Everybody was tired of dying, so they got out and partied. Right? And remember, all the speakeasies, all the drinking, all the crazy dresses, all the flaunting of traditional values, that was all after the Spanish flu. And the Spanish flu, they call it from Spain because all the soldiers coming back from World War I, they carried it back from Spain. And that's when they started dying here. And just like in COVID, what they realized later on is you actually need the sun. If you go outside, you got a better chance of living. And what do we do during COVID? We all hid inside. And you couldn't go to the beach. Stupid. And so in the 2008 financial crisis, everybody went bankrupt. Well, here's what happens when you get bankrupt. Can you get a loan? If your credit score is 400, who are you going to see to borrow money? Yeah. All these things that end with the last word financial around here, I won't say any names because I don't get anybody in trouble or I get myself in trouble, but all these little companies that are charging 20, 30% a month for insurance. I didn't say a day, I didn't say a year, I said a month. So, 360%. I was talking to one of the owners of one of those companies, and they actually had somebody do a mortgage on that level. It was 10% a month. Yikes. So if you look at 2008 financial crisis, now, let's just do the math, right? So you know what Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are? That's where you buy a mortgage, and then the government buys it from the bank. And then our U.S. government says they should be in the mortgage business because they give you a 30-year loan locked in no matter what happens, which is why I've got a 2% interest on my 30-year mortgage, and I'm not paying it off anytime soon, right? Because it's 2% interest, and CDs are paying more than that, right? So it doesn't make sense to pay off. Well, no one's dumb enough to do that but the federal government, right? That's why we got inflation. Okay? So, in 2008, if you go bankrupt, how many years does it take till it falls off your credit score? 7 years. You guys aren't supposed to tell everybody yet. Come on. You guys should know this. I'm just kidding. I'm trusting you. Well, 7 years is what year? It's 2015. Okay? 2015 is when housing recovered. You think that's an accident? No, all those people that had gone bankrupt in 2008, they now could get a house again. And so what did housing start doing? But what did we not do in our country? We didn't build any houses from 2008 to 2015. And so now we have a housing shortage. So now you have where you have inflation on housing, and it's not really going away, because here's the weird thing. People want to live in a house when it's 10 degrees outside. They don't want to live in a tent. Can you believe it? Who wants to live outside tonight? Anybody ready to go? How about a week? No, hot showers, pretty nice. So when we look at what happened in Los Angeles, this is more like this than this. Because these people, they lost their house, but it wasn't their fault, right? It was a natural disaster. Now, when these people lost their houses, it was their fault. Most of them. Because they lied about their income. Okay? And so what our society did is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, is we punished these people, and whenever COVID hit, we started giving people more money, which you didn't need to do. Because if you just open up the country, everyone would have been stuck inside saving money. What are they going to do? They're going to spend it, which is why we got inflation. So if you look at Los Angeles today versus where they're going to be in 5 years, it's going to cause a huge amount of growth. Now, one problem they're going to have is what? Who's going to insure these houses anymore? Good luck getting insurance. But I'm sure the state of California is going to create a fund, and they're going to raise their income taxes, and they're going to what? They're going to do it.
Is there laws on that for discriminating? Like, I
What?
want to insure your house, but I want to insure theirs, or something like that?
Ooh, now you're getting political here. Darla, I'm not going to answer that question. But that's a very, at least in my version of capitalistic America, you insure a house if you can make money on it, not because of someone's whatever. I don't care about the other stuff. But that is a good question. So in some areas, the government has required some insurance companies to insure places they don't want to insure. But there's also there was a history of racism in our country where, like for instance, on some of the deeds it said you couldn't let an African American live here. You couldn't insure an African, so that's where that came from. But I think it's also a little screwy, because if you build a house on top of a mountain around a brush pile, what could go wrong?
Isn't it true that
Now I'm going to show you this house right here. I thought this is pretty cool. If you guys don't mind sharing. You guys, Bradley, can you pass these out? Hayden, can you come up and pass it out too? Thank you. Okay. I didn't save one for myself. I need to get one back. Okay. I know. I was not in a fraternity, just so you guys know. So they're talking about it. Great question. Cheryl said they said they're going to cut through some of the red tape. That's fine, but you've never been to the city of Malibu. It's a weird place. So Pepperdine actually, before this, around Christmas, everything around Pepperdine burned down around the entire school. Here's give you an example. There's some trees that was called Payson Library, and the trees touched the library. And all the trees in the library burned down. But guess what Pepperdine did not have happen? Not a single building was lost in the fire. So everything behind it, both sides of it, except for this little area down here, burned. Where I used to live in honors housing, but the behind it burned, the side it burned, in front of it burned. But they didn't lose a single building. Because, we've got 12,000 structures are burned. But what Pepperdine did is they take into account some of the things this gentleman did when he built this house. So if you look at this house right here, if you guys notice, do you see any houses around it? Nothing. So if you had a fire, here's some good, if a fire comes here, remember the Smoky Mountain fire that hit Tennessee? That fire could happen here too if we don't get rain. Now Pepperdine's pretty smart with their stuff. I didn't actually participate in this, but I had friends that do it. You could actually take lighter fluid, throw it on the walls, light the walls on fire, and they'll burn. Because everything on the campus is made out of fireproof material. So a couple things they did in this house, if you see, is his yard has no vegetation. You see this guy's yard? He has no vegetation in the yard because he's already been through fires, and he knows if you got vegetation, what's going to happen? It's going to burn. And then when it burns, your house is going to burn. Now, if you see this guy's car right here, unfortunately, his neighbor parked his car by this wall. And that car, they say, got up to 1,200 degrees heat. But when he built that wall out of concrete. So guess what the concrete did? It saved his house. Before the fire started, this guy's actually a medical doctor. He went in and he moved all the trash cans and loose items around the house and got them away from the house. Because the trash can can burn your house down. He has no eaves or overhangs. He has no attic vents. You guys see that? There's no attic vents. It's huge. Because when I lived in the fire zone, I was, so my roommate in college was an RA. So I was an RA, a residential advisor, and he was always with his girlfriend. So basically, who became the RA? Me. Everybody needs a vacuum, there's something, I'm here. Yeah, what do you want? I need a vacuum. Here you go. And so we knew that we had training to close off the vents if there was a fire to be ready for it. And they would train us on what to do. So a metal roof with a fire-resistant, so when they built his roof here, he put fire-resistant material underneath the roof so it wouldn't catch on fire. Metal roof, a simple roof line, just you see how this is basically almost like an A-frame house, just a little higher on the roof. And then he built the walls with 1 hour resistant fire material. And then he has on his back of his house is deck A-class wood, which is resistant to fire. He also built the house in the front of it with fire-treated wood. And then he did tempered glass to protect the interiors. Now the good news is, when they rebuild all these houses, what should they do? Same thing. Now, are they going to do that? Who knows? To me, it's kind of an ugly house, but it did live. But if you start looking at one of the good things about the situation is every time we have a crisis in our country, it usually results to positive things that happen out of it. And this is a really big positive thing because this guy's house, it's fine. And then he did have to go back and protect his house from looters. because they were coming in to break in into his house. But what you'll notice is, you can build houses in these areas that are protected. But even for your own sake, look at this disaster and say, well, if this was going to happen to my house, I need to remove those trash cans right next to my yard. Actually, I got some propane tanks right next to my house. What could go wrong? I just can see 3 of them in my head right now. And so, stuff like that is really, really important. And this disaster is not going to be like COVID, though. These are the disasters that you get rebuilt. The majority of the people, the view of the ocean, next to the ocean, that real estate's worth money. Not so much the house, right? But I thought this was an interesting thing, just as you're seeing all the negative of the other issues with water and things they had, is some people, you can plan this thing out. You can make it easier. And this house was just completed this year. He just finished it. One of the problems you have, though, Cheryl, is once that water gets in the attic, the most deadly part of those fires is those embers. Once those embers get underneath that roof, you're stuck. Because you think about this, right? Like when you think about it, like the way they build like a fire system. If they built a fire system in this building, you'd have fire stuff here. Because the idea is to save people, not the structure. They don't put them in the attic, shooting up at the attic. And so once those embers get in between the house, and you get an 80-mile-an-hour wind with fire on it, you're done. I mean, 80 miles an hour. You can't run that fast. Think about that. That's going faster than you're on the interstate. There's nothing you can do.
Would it be true to say that the insurances are all gonna go up, but our taxes are gonna go up because the government, I forgot how many hundreds of billions of dollars it's gonna cost, the government's gonna give them a bunch of money, but we're gonna end up paying for it.
Right. So what'll happen is they've already actually started talking about that this morning, the Republicans and Democrats, that to raise the debt ceiling, we'll give money to fix these homes in California if you raise the debt ceiling so we can cut taxes. They're already working on a deal. Now, it's terrible. It's awful. It's just like all the stuff that you're thinking. We got to help these people. Yeah, but if you're going to help them, you better build a house like that. If you live in a fire zone, it better look something like that.
First thing you
Right.
better do is put somebody up there that's honest, because you're out there, because if they don't, the people that need them never get it.
Well, that's, yeah, good luck with that. Okay. So that's really, when we look at the thing, I just want to go that really quickly and then talk a little bit today about why the stock market's dropping and what's going on, and then some tax changes if we have time for this year. So you might have noticed the S&P 500 and the bond market have not been doing very well since about the middle of December of last year. And we normally get what's called the Santa Claus rally. So historically speaking, 90% of the time after Christmas, we see about a 1% gain in the S&P. We did not see that this year. And yesterday, all the rally that happened after Trump was elected president had basically disappeared to where there had been no change from November till basically today. So if you've been watching Investment Insider, you've been coming here for a while, you'll know that interest rates mean a heck of a lot to the stock market. And why is that?
Determines where people want that.
Yeah. So if you look at your money, and you say, like most of our customers, they don't look at too in depth, they just look at how much money did I make this month. They look at this month or this day or this minute. When an institution invests money, they look at it, like Chris is saying, a game of chess. I'm going to move my pawn to whichever gives me the best statistical chance of making money. And that's what's called the risk-free rate. The risk-free rate is what can you invest in with absolutely no risk, or now that our government's got so much debt, that's kind of changing, but historically it's always been Absolutely no risk. And so as the risk-free rate goes up, taking risk doesn't make sense. So people sell stuff that are risky and they invest in stuff that's safe, that has no risk. Okay, now the Federal Reserve made the decision to change policy. The day after the election, they had a meeting. They said, we don't care who the president is. We are going to determine policy based on data. Then at the last meeting, a month later, they said, we're scared of Donald Trump. We're not going to cut rates as much next year. Prepare for higher interest rates. Now, as I speak this, and this is not something that's political, you can actually watch them say it. And in the minutes, they actually said, we're scared of Donald Trump. Now, he's not even president yet. Right? Now, and this is why we're seeing a lot of uncertainty. It's why it's going to be very difficult for us to make money until we get some of this uncertainty gone. And the way that uncertainty goes away is we see exactly what Donald Trump's going to do. Because once we see what he's going to do, then we know what to do. I mean, I've got customers that are completely ready to jump off a building, because of X, Y, or Z. And that's not, first off, that's not a good idea. Don't do it. Second thing, it's going to probably be better than you think. And just calm down. We'll have another president in 4 years that you can dislike. And I'm pretty sure this one will be disliked within a week or two. So just give it some time. So he's already pretty disliked. But anyway, the point is, when you look at our markets, what we're seeing now is even though the Federal Reserve has cut interest rates, rates are going up. So interest rates hit about 3.6% in October. I think it was like around October 3rd through 5th. And now they're up to this is on the 10-year Treasury. Now everybody looks at the 10-year Treasury because when you invest money, most people look at 10 years out. What's my money going to do over the next 10 years? If you're looking at your money daily and you worry about how much money it's going to make today, you're probably in the wrong room. This is not the place for you because you can't invest that way. You might as well just bury it in your backyard and hope the fire doesn't come. Okay? Wonder how much cash got burned. Good question. Anyway, so now, yesterday, interest rates hit 4.8% in the 10-year Treasury. Wait a minute. The Federal Reserve's cutting rates. They're cutting rates. But rates are what? Going up. Now, obviously, this is very interesting because in my career, I've never seen the Federal Reserve act this way. Before anything had actually been done, they're already changing interest rates. Do you guys understand? Give you an example. So the Consumer Price Index came out this morning, and it showed that, Production Price Index, the cost of the inputs into making products only went up 0.2%, or effectively 2.4% a year. The goal for inflation is to be at 2%. That's a pretty good number, right? That means the Federal Reserve has got the economy to where inflation is pretty much what? Right where it needs to be. So, and they've said that normal rates are about 3% to 3.5%, and we're now at 4.8%, and the numbers are coming in. This is for last month before they did this. The numbers are coming in pretty good. But they're so scared of what's going to happen on Monday that they're already ready to raise interest rates. Okay? Now, I don't want to get into the political part of this stuff because it's unfortunate, but it just has to be said. This is very, very odd. Typically, the Federal Reserve is not a political institution. They're supposed to be a nonpartisan bunch of math geeks that are from universities. That's true. I mean, Jerome Powell is from Stanford. He's an economics teacher. All these people are basically just a bunch of economists. They're really fascinating for me to listen to, but most people do not want to hear them talk. Okay? So that's where we are in the numbers. That's what came out this morning. But if you look at this from an investor, when you see that 4.8% rate, and you see a stock like NVIDIA, which trades at 52 times profit, so I can get 4.8% for 10 years, or 48% plus the compounding interest, right? Because the 4.8% a year, I could buy more interest, so I can get over 50% return, or I can buy a stock that trades at 52 times profit, make about a 2% return. What do I buy? So what you're seeing in the stock market is as these rates go up, people are selling the high-risk stocks, and they're buying the what? The low-risk things. Now, if you look at electricity usage and all these data centers being built, NVIDIA still looks pretty good, right? Because their profits are probably not going to stay at this level. They're going to probably what? Go up higher. So everybody's buying the stock not based on what they make today, but what they're going to make in the future. Just like the Federal Reserve. They don't care that they're cutting rates today. They care what are they going to do in the future. Which is why, so many people are like, well, they're cutting rates. It doesn't matter. What are they going to do in the future? Because here's the thing. If you buy a mortgage today, you don't get to pay last month's rates. You get to pay what? Add a couple of percentage points to this. You get to pay 7% on a mortgage. 7 or 8%. Does that affect housing? How about cars? If you can get a car loan at 5% or 8%, does it affect your car payment? Now look, if you don't believe me, there's probably no way to do this, but in my mind, I look at cars all the time, not because I care, I don't want to buy a car, but because I look at F-150s. Why do you think I look at F-150s? By the way, I don't drive one of those. There's a lot of them here in the office now. They're trending? No. You're dreaming. Yeah. Maybe, sure. The reason why I buy one is they were like $100,000 for one. And now all of a sudden, my wife's like, we're moving to the farm, and I'm going to get me a truck. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so, we're going to move the farm, but a truck? And she's like, I'm going to drive me a truck. I'm like, I'm not spending $100,000 on a car. And she's like, well, and I started looking, like, actually, they're down to about $60,000. Because the price of F-150s is what? It's going down, which means inflation is dropping. And when you raise rates higher, car sales go down. And housing goes down because they need stuff. And so what we see right now here is, what's happening in the market is the Federal Reserve has basically caused a panic. Their job is for price, stability, and smooth unemployment. Their job is to calm people down. And what have they done? They've scared a little, not terrible, but a little bit of a drop. Now, the thing is, just because Donald Trump says he's going to bring down energy prices, can he build a bunch of pipelines starting on Monday to New York City? Is that going to happen very quickly? If you drill oil today in Alaska, can you even get it here by tomorrow? No. It's going to take a long time for this stuff to occur. And I would actually argue the stuff he does now is probably going to affect the next president more than him. So a lot of this is really kind of nuts from a fear perspective. But that's kind of where we are when we look at, and this really affects, student loans, autos, houses, credit cards. And so my guess is once some of this stuff subsides, we're going to go back to the data, and we're going to go away from the fear. And a couple of those things that, like Trump has not decided on tariffs, what he's going to do.
If he backed off on the tariffs, would that ease some of the fear?
Yeah. Yeah. But here's what if he did, Roger. If he just say exactly what he's going to do, it'd be okay. And when he's president, I'm sure he's just going to do it. And then we might have a bad day that it's over. Right? Because the unknown, oh man, what's he going to do? What's going to happen? Once it's known, it's what? Oh, it's okay. Like, remember Russia invaded Ukraine. What do all the European countries say? Oh, man, we're not going to have power. What did they start doing in Germany? You guys ever study that in 2022? They started cutting down trees. It was crazy. Like, all the Germans thought they weren't going to have heat, and so they started raiding the Black Forest. And so I'm not kidding. You can look it up. The Germans were like stockpiling wood. Like I just imagine all these like Viking-looking German dudes going out with pickaxes, and they're just chopping down every tree they've ever seen. But it was crazy. Like they were buying wood pellets on a level that has never been seen since like World War II type level. I mean, they were like cutting down every tree they could find to make. Remember, well now, guess how much natural gas Germany gets from Russia? None. Zero. The pipeline got cut off about on January 1st. Ukraine stopped shipping natural gas to their country. Just imagine that. So since the war's been going on, Ukraine's been shipping natural gas through their country to give it to Europe. That's why you don't win a war, right? Because I'm telling you right now, if they kill my kids, all those pipes are blowing up. And I'm going to be the first one blowing them up. They better kill me quick. Because Americans wouldn't do that. Americans wouldn't let somebody make money if they were killing us. I firmly believe that. We wouldn't do that. We'd just go kill them. And the way you kill somebody is with money. If they're throwing rocks at you, you're okay. You know, they start throwing drones, you're in trouble. And so, but that's what is happening here is the market will adjust. The market will adapt. Now, this morning they came out with Trump thinks he's going to do a 2% tariff increase every month. So it slowly goes up until people start making stuff in America. But remember, the overall Trump plan, whether you love it or hate it, is very simple, right? You cut regulations, making it cheaper to do business in America. You cut corporate taxes. Then you raise tariffs on stuff made outside the country. So basically, you make it cheaper to do business here, make it more expensive to do business somewhere else. Well, what's the market? What are companies going to do if it's more expensive to do business overseas? They're going to come home. I don't care what your political views are. That's pretty much common sense. Companies exist to make money. They don't care if you're a Republican. They don't care if you're a Democrat. They just want to make money. They don't care. You tell them the rules, and they'll do it. Now, the one thing that I'm more nervous about is immigration. Because if you deport people with felonies, like I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a judge in Warren County, we were sledding. I'm like, how many people in your courtroom are illegal? About a third of the people in there. Okay. Well, if you're driving drunk and you're beating your wife, bye. We don't need you here. Gone. Tomorrow. But if you're actually working, I think we should find a way for them to help stay. Because that's a bigger issue on inflation than the tariffs. Who's going to do the work? Because most of this room is retired. So guess what? You guys ready to go back to work? Because that's the other way to fix it. There's a labor shortage because the drones are the Terminator robots aren't ready yet. Okay, they're coming, but they're not here yet. Okay, but that's the those are your choices. And so, but the issue is for the market, it's not any of this stuff really. It's just the unknown. Once it's known, it's going to be okay. If you tell companies that if you make your stuff overseas, it's going to cost you 20% more. If it's 18% cheaper to make it here, what are they going to do? They're going to make it here. No, they can't. And that's where our government system kind of stinks, Roger. Because the best way to do this would be to say, in 3 years, all this stuff's going to happen. But you can't do that in America because in 2 years, Republicans are probably going to lose the midterm election and the Democrats are going to be in control. So they're going to probably do stuff they shouldn't do quickly because they're trying to what? Do it early. And that's not easy to do. But if you did say a year from now, this is going to happen, can you imagine how much construction would be going on here? They would be booming because these companies would be in a hurry. All these old factories that aren't being used. And you know, here's the thing. A place like Tennessee, we couldn't handle it. So where would they build? Where would all these people go? They would go to cities like St. Louis, Memphis, Detroit, we have empty buildings, empty properties, and they start converting them. Because we don't have enough land here you can't build it quick enough. So oddly enough, the cities are where most of the growth would probably occur. That's where you have empty buildings. Don't believe me? Read the National Business Journal. There's a lot of these buildings selling for 85% less than people paid for them during COVID. That's not in St. Louis, that's in Nashville. They built all those big buildings. You see a lot of those cranes going up anymore? There's a lot less cranes in that skyline. A lot of empty buildings. That Batman building, I think it's like 60% empty. So that's not a direct, double check that, but I thought that's what I read. But those are the big issues here on the market. But it's all about the unknown. But here's the good news. In 6 days, we'll have a new president. And I don't think there's going to be nuclear war on that day. So you're going to wake up and it'll be that Tuesday will be another day. And the good news is some of these things will start being known. Because here's the thing, even if you wanted to deport 14 million people, you can't do it. Because they don't have enough money authorized to round up 14 million people. Think about that. This is a terrible example, but even in Germany in World War II, they couldn't kill that many people in 5 or 6 years. They were killing everybody they saw that was Jewish. So you can't easily do all these things, right? And you're not going to see train cars full of people coming through Manchester. Not going to happen. Even if somebody wanted to do that, we don't have the stomach in our country for that. It's just not going to happen. So when we look at stuff, this is a normal correction. Normally we get 3 5% corrections. We get 1 10% correction every year. We get a 20% bear market every 3.5 years. Since 2022, we've only had 2 5% corrections and not a single 10% in the last 2 years. We've been unusually blessed the last 2 years to have almost no volatility. So when that occurs, what do you get the next year usually? More volatility. You get more ups and downs. But I'm really optimistic that the closer we get to the swearing in of the new president, the more likely some of these things are going to be answered. I hope that they work on the taxes first and do this other stuff later. Make it cheaper to do business here. Make it more attractive to do business here first. Then maybe you don't have to worry about it. Maybe you don't need a tariff. Now, China's a different deal, but outside of China, do we really need a tariff on Canada? I mean, they're pretty much our best friends. If you keep attacking your friends, you're not going to have any friends. But people from New York have a different view on that, but that's how it goes. So that's where we are there on that end. So let me go over the tax changes real quick. Do you have any questions about this? Sorry.
We're getting Greenland in this deal?
Actually, Bradley, I didn't tell you this story, but the cool thing is, so Greenland, the Wall Street Journal had a great article. I encourage you guys to Google it. And it talked about the U.S. military has been eyeing Greenland for 30 years for our country because Greenland has a bunch of rare earth metals and has a bunch of natural gas, has a bunch of oil. And they're close to Europe and they're close to the Northeast. So one of the main issues with Denmark is they don't care about Greenland. It's not on their radar. And this country has the ability to be very, very rich and very, very wealthy. And they could actually replace Russia. Russia's already been replaced, but it's coming from us and it's coming from Qatar. But Greenland's it's a European-based country-ish, secured by the U.S. Navy. If they wanted to conquer Greenland, it's not very hard, right? U.S. Navy's already the one that keeps it out of the Russians. So there's a lot of energy there. So I really feel like this is probably going to lead to Greenland being independent, and it's probably going to lead to them becoming very, very rich because they could easily replace China. And, the one thing that Greenland has that a lot of places don't have is they have a lot of water, too. A lot of ice, and so, you could use some of that in some parts of the country. So let's cover a couple little basic things, and we'll get finished. So they raised, in 2025, they raised the gifting limit to $19,000. As you guys know, President Biden, when he was vice president and powerless, and Mitch McConnell, when he was the minority leader for the Senate, changed the tax laws on inheritance tax, where now you can gift money before you die through a lifetime gift credit. Right now, that lifetime gift credit is going to be $13,990,000. So you can give that much away now with no taxes. Not out of IRAs, of course. $19,000 is how much you can give to somebody with no paperwork required. You cannot give it to anybody that works here at this office, but outside of here, you're fine. We've had some customers try to do that. That is actually illegal, and you cannot accept a gift or you will be fired. Some other people didn't realize that, but they used to do that. So anyway, that is a policy. Then the income tax rates are 10%. Well, hold on. Let me get the standard deduction. Is going to be a nice even $15,000 per person. Now, if you're over 65, you get another $1,300. And I didn't check that, but I think it'll go up a little bit of inflation. That's going to be really fun for me because tax planning is really easy this year. It's $15,000 even. You make $100,000, $85,000 is your taxable income. Nice, smooth, even $15,000. The 10% bracket for married people is going to be, well, individuals is 11,925, married 23,850. Any of that income after the standard deduction, you're taxed at 10%. So if you make $30,000, you have $15,000 is taxable because your first 15 is tax-free. The next 15 would be taxed if you're single at 10%, up to about 12 grand. It would be at 10%. Then after that, it goes to 12. You guys understand how these brackets work? It's basically anybody gets a standard deduction. Your first $15,000, whether you're Jeff Bezos or you're homeless, is tax-free. Your first 15 grand, you don't have to pay taxes on. Then if you're over 65, you get an additional $1,300. If you're blind, you get instead of $1,300, I think it's $2,050 or something. And so that's money you don't pay taxes on. Then after you get through that initial standard deduction, that's when you pay income taxes. It's always funny because people are like, well, if I just pull that extra dollar out, I'm going to go in the next bracket. Our tax code is progressive. That means you just pay taxes on that little amount of money, not on everything you have. So many people think our tax code is regressive. It's actually progressive. So it is tax time. So when you do your taxes, obviously we're not accountants. Just think about that. It's not as big a deal as you think. Okay. The 12% bracket is, I put it down here wrong. So I don't know what it is. Okay. So then we got 24% bracket. Sorry, 22% bracket is 48,475, 96,950, which means this is 11,926. Sorry, it's anything above that. So 11,926, 23,851. Then the 24% bracket is 103,350, 206, 700. 32 is 197, 300. 394, 600. 35 is 250, 525, 501, 050. And the highest bracket in the land, 37%, 626, 350 to 751, 600. And so, of course, how this works is any income in these brackets. This is single, that's married. So this is if you're single, that's if you're married. You basically just double it. It's not super hard. If any income you have in these brackets, this is the rate you pay. So that's where you get your tax brackets. The HSA limit is going up to $4,300 individually And in a weird thing, 85.50 for joint, for family. 401ks go to 23.5. If you're over 50, 7,500. Here's an interesting little law change we're going to have a podcast on. If you're between the ages of 60 and 63, instead of your catch-up being 7,500, it's 11,250. If you're 64, you don't get the extra catch-up. But for some reason, if you're 60 to 63, they really want you to put more money in. That's going to be a 401k compliance nightmare, but whatever. You can put up to 70,000. So this is the employee limit of 23,500 that you can put in a 401k. Between your employer and the employee, you can still put $70,000 a year into a 401k, tax deferred or tax free through a Roth. The IRA is going to stay at 7,000 plus 1,000 more if you're over 50. The Roth income phase out is from 150 to 165 for individuals and 236 to 246 for married couples. Now, the big question in everybody's mind on taxes is, if you remember when Donald Trump was running for office, he said there'd be no taxes on tips, there'd be no taxes on Social Security, and they would lower the corporate tax. Stay tuned for 2026 to see if any of that occurs. I don't understand how that legally is possible to tax that way. Yes, Hayden?
The simple IRA also has the catch-up, the super catch-up as well,
Yeah, not just the 401k. Yes, that's in there too for small businesses. These are just some of the changes. I don't have a lot of time to go through all of them, but the brackets went up a little bit. There's not a lot of massive changes. Really, the biggest massive change is, like Hayden was talking about, is the super catch-up for 60 to 63. Beyond that, not a lot of changes in the law. Now, in 2026, we're supposed to have massive changes to taxes. I think a lot of people voted for Trump because they didn't want those changes to happen, taxes to go up. And there's a good argument to be made. If you live in California, you pay some of the highest taxes in the country, and what's the government done for you lately? I think that's, if I was a politician in California, I think you should probably lose your job because all that money and you still can't, you ran out of water. That's a hard one to stomach, but anyway, it is what it is. I'd be pretty mad. If that happened in Tennessee, I'd be pretty mad, and we don't pay those kind of taxes. We're pretty lucky here. What happened in Gatlinburg was a big problem and a unneeded death toll. But those are some of the changes. Not a lot of changes. I guess the biggest one is the gift and the inheritance tax are nice. You got a cool $14 million or $28 million as a couple you could pass to your heirs tax-free. Now, one thing in this law to be aware of is if your spouse died within 5 years of, you have to fill out a form telling the IRS you want to take this credit and keep it. If you don't tell the IRS you're taking the credit, after 5 years, what? You don't get it. So if you had a spouse die and you win the lottery tomorrow, those heirs are going to really wish you had done the form for the credit. But you do have to claim the $13,990,000 credit. If someone dies this year, you do have to claim that credit, even as a married couple. Now, why that matters so much is they talked about lowering this number to a much lower number. If you claim that credit and the laws change, you have that credit forever. So, not that it applies to a lot of people, but that is one thing in the law. You do have to apply for the credit. Do I have any questions? I know I ran a little over. Oh, disclaimer. Investment insights, educational space, to do our best for accurate tax, legal, and financial advice. Please seek out competent legal advice to your unique situation for making a decision. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I know. Thanks for coming in today, guys.
I'm Brent.
You trust you. Yes. bracket. So the 12% goes all the way up to 96. So it's from 23 at 51 to 96. I put that down wrong on the bracket. From 23 851 to 96 952, you pay 22%. So the 10% is anything from 0 to this, and the 12% is 23 to this. I put it in there wrong. I did it wrong. That's at 12%. So,
Refresh my memory.
yeah.
When did we change over from Ameritrade to this year?